So, welcome to Earthworms 2024 Year in Review. What I'll be chatting about in this talk is some updates from the National Earthworm Recording Scheme, which we run through the Earthworm Society of Britain, and a number of projects which I've been doing kind of in partnership with the Earthworm Society of Britain and the company I work for, the Biological Recording Company. Some of the things that I'll be reporting, some of the projects have been running over 2 years. So these are the results so far from 2 years. So some of the stats will include 2023. So, but to start off, a little bit about the National Earthworm Recording Scheme. So this year we've planned 14 earthworm sampling days. So a lot of them have already taken place. We do have 2 coming up as part of the annual field meeting in Lancashire, which are available to book. There's also 2 earthworm ID courses. So I did one earlier in the year at the World Museum in Liverpool, and I'll be doing one next week actually at the Natural History Museum, and there's still a couple of spaces left on that. So if anyone's interested, I recommend booking via the Biological Recording Company's Eventbrite. And I also did one Earthworm Study Day, and that's where we sit around with microscopes IDing earthworm specimens that we've collected from home or from earthworm sampling days, and that was with the Teesville Naturally Connected project up in the Yorkshire Dales. So yeah, we've had quite a few events going on this year. There's been some interesting reports of species as well. So some people may be aware that last year, I believe it was, last year or the year before, I found a species of earthworm that had never been found in the UK before, Kenlinus armidus, which may or may not be getting renamed as a different species soon. But this is Stop Press News. Just last week, I found it in a new site in London in Chelsea Physics Garden. So as soon as iRecord is up and running again, it's down for maintenance today. I'll be submitting that record, and we'll have 2 records of Kenlinus armidus. Now, what's interesting about Kenlinus armidus is it was previously recorded from Ireland, but just not in the UK. The other species that they had in the Republic of Ireland, but that we had not had recorded in the UK, was Aparectidea cupulifera. And you'll see it here on my screen. It looks very similar to one of our common species, Aparectidea caliginosa, but its bumps, its tubercular pubitatis, this feature here that we use for identification, it has these almost sucker-like discs, 2 of them here. So it is quite distinctive when you see it down a microscope. And this was recorded within England, within West Sussex, by Natural England as part of the Natural Capital Ecosystem assessment. So on the 17th of October in 2023, but that got added to our database this year. So we've now got the species list up from 29 species in the UK to 31, and that includes sharing all of the species that have been previously found in Ireland. Well, that was until I got notified of a taxonomic update. So just when I think I've got things simplified, I do get contacted by a taxonomist in Ireland, Olaf Schmidt, who just let me know about a new species that they've now got within the Republic of Ireland as well. It's not a species that's just been recently found. It's a subspecies that's been elevated to species level. So Lumbricus friendlyoides is a species that is very similar and very difficult to differentiate from Lumbricus rubellus. It was previously a subspecies of Lumbricus rubellus, but it has now been added to the list of species for the UK and Ireland. And myself and Emma Sherlock will be going through our records and having a chat with Olaf about how we add this in and whether it's a species we can actually record separately, or whether we'll be classing Lumbricus rubellus as an aggregate species, because it, depending on how difficult it is to sort out morphologically, where something you can really only tell apart with genetic material, it becomes quite hard for us to record it. And we can see here that yeah, there are size overlaps between the different species that they picked out. But yeah. Okay, so what have we achieved in the National Earthworm Recording Scheme this year? And when I say we, that is definitely a collective we, because the records that are submitted come from a wide range of earthworm recorders. Well, we've had 810 new records this year. And if we look at the graph on the right, it doesn't look like that many, but that's deceptive. That's 810 that have been processed and added to the um, recording scheme database. There are more that are in iRecord that are waiting to be verified, and there are more that are in iRecord that have been verified but haven't yet been downloaded. So I last did this in August. I was planning on doing it today, but I hadn't realized that iRecord was down for maintenance. So I like to leave it to the last minute so that I get as many records in for the update as possible. But I think I've learned a bit of a lesson this year with doing it so late. So we can see that the records are not spread evenly across the territories of UK, Ireland, Channel Islands, Isle of Man, etc. Big thank you to Sue Harvey for continuing to survey the Isle of Man and the Calf of Man, and the number of records is going up. I know that Sue's particularly proud that the number of records for the Isle of Man has now overtaken what we've got shared from the Channel Islands. So yeah, well done, Sue. Wales has went up a bit as well, which is good because our Welsh records have always been quite lacking. So a big thank you to the recorders from Wales that have submitted some records as well. But yeah, we're now up to almost 29,000 records. And 10 years ago, when we started the recording scheme, we would never have dreamed that we would have got to this level. There's also going to be a bit of a jump in records when I've processed some historic records that Kerry Calloway has been working on and slaving away in her spare time, going through museums records and records from research papers, etc. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is just quickly go through some projects that I've been working on and just kind of present some of the results. And again, a huge thank you because there's been a lot of volunteers involved in all of these projects. So the first one was a project that we titled Leave the Leaves, and it was in partnership with the Royal Parks, their Help Nature Thrive project. And what the Royal Parks wanted to know is what is the impact of clearance of leaves on their sites. So the idea was that we would sample transects with 10 soil pits spaced about 2 meters apart, and we do these in areas where the leaves have been cleared and where the adjacent areas where the leaves have not been cleared. So we can see how the transects were laid out on the bottom diagram, and on the top left diagram you can see where some of our transects were in Kensington Gardens. So where you've got two coloured boxes side by side, the L indicates an area where the leaves were left, and the C indicates an area where in the code where the leaves were cleared. So these were paired samples. So we're not comparing one site to another. We're comparing the cleared transect to the left leaves left transect in each one. What we found actually was that there was no significant difference in either earthworm abundance or species diversity. I will caveat that with the transects that if I was going to do it again, I'd want a bit more information on when the leaves are cleared. So one of the limitations of the project, we had to do it around when the project needed to deliver things and when there was availability to do it in the park. But it was interesting that there didn't seem like there was any obvious difference. So yeah, but there are some caveats with that. But yeah, that's what we found. What was interesting though as well was if we look at the species diversity, there's things there that you'd expect. There's things there that are always common and you'd always expect. So Aparectidia rosea, Allelobifora chlorotica, Aparectidia caliginosa. They are three species that you will always get in parks in decent numbers. Same even if you go to arable grasslands, etc. You're always going to get those species in quite big numbers. Aparectidia longa seems to particularly thrive in these urban grasslands as well, but it's still something that is quite common. So not a big surprise. But the thing there, the species that stands out to me that I'd like to point out is Aparectidia icterica. So Aparectidia icterica is classed as a rare earthworm in the UK. We're not entirely sure of its origin, so we're not sure whether it's something that we should class as native to the UK or whether it's something that isn't. But what we are seeing is it seems to have a bit of an association with what we call synanthropic habitats. So those are habitats that are associated with people. So I'm finding it a lot in urban green spaces. So that might be urban nature reserves, but where there's grasslands, but also parks. So I thought that was quite interesting. I just want to point out that it's one of the species that had a fairly significant representation within the data set. So what did we achieve outside of the project in terms of recording? Well, 56 new earthworm records also went into the recording scheme. That's 12 species recorded at the site, and we had 2 rare species recorded. So Aparectidea icterica and Aparectidea nocturna, which is another deep burrowing species like Aparectidea longa. So the second project I want to mention is the Haytime project, and I don't have a lot to report on this, but I just want to raise awareness of it. It's a project that I'm doing with the Forest of Bowland National Landscape and the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. And I've been doing it for 2 years, where we go to sites that are either potential sites for hay meadow restoration or sites that are currently under hay meadow restoration methods. So we've done 9 sites per year. Sometimes we repeat a site. The idea is that we're gathering data that we can look at in comparison to the years in restoration. So what we're hoping to do is build up some evidence to see whether or not things like earthworm abundance and species diversity are impacted by the number of years in restoration. And also looking at, are there specific earthworm species assemblages that you get associated with hay meadows versus agricultural environments, mainly pasture up in the Forest of Bowland. Again, what I would like to point out, though, even at this early stage, I think it's quite nice to have a look at the earthworm species composition. And again, we've got Aparectidea rosea, Aparectidea longa, Aparectidea caliginosa, and Alalobophora chlorotica coming out with strong representation, which is not surprising. But the 5th species here that is represented in decent numbers is Aparectidea limicola. And that is another species that is quite rare. Now, this one seems to have quite a northwest distribution. You don't get as much in the east of England, and particularly in the south. So I think it probably likes it quite wet. And for anyone that knows the Forest of Bowland will know that it can get a little bit wet there. So it's in the west of England, plenty of rain. So I just think it's quite interesting that it's the 3rd most common species from our samples there. Now, that's not to say it is the 3rd most commonly recorded on sites, on every site, but where it is present, it's sometimes present in really decent numbers as well. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. So what have we found with the Haytime project? Well, 124 new records. We've got 20 earthworm species records and 3 rare species recorded. So icterica has turned up again, limicola and hortensis. Next project is the Sapperton Wilder project. Again, I don't have a lot to report on this one because it's early stages, but it's a project where they're looking at testing out different sustainable agricultural practices to see the impact on earthworm populations, but also other taxonomic groups as well. And they've got 5 principles of regenerative agriculture, which are embedded in all of the stuff that they do. So they include biodiversity, livestock integration, minimizing soil disturbance, protecting the soil surface, and maintaining living roots. What's been interesting here is that we have not been finding any rare species, really. So Merchionum muldali is classed as a rare species, but is known to be quite commonly found in agricultural settings. So the species diversity on these sites is really quite low. But actually for this study, that is quite good because it means we've got the baseline of an agricultural environment that has been quite intensively farmed and therefore has a low baseline in terms of earthworm species diversity. What I think is going to be really interesting to look at is earthworm abundance here, because my personal opinion and my gut instinct is that earthworm abundance is not something that really tells us whether the soils are healthy and have. I don't think it's going to be linked to species diversity, but a little bit more about that later. So yeah, 125 new earthworm records so far, 9 earthworm species recorded, and just 1 rare species, Meadow muldarley. Right, on to the next project, Nurturing Nature project. So this is a Wiltshire-based project where we did some recording across a number of sites, got a fair few different species, a number of site species lists done. What I want to point out with this, so 73 new earthworm records, 12 species recorded, 2 rare species, Dendrobina hortensis and Merciona muldarley, and 4 Vice County firsts. So Lumbricus castaneus there is one of our most common species, but it had never been recorded in this Vice County before. So shows the importance of even recording the common things with a group that's so under recorded. What is really interesting here is we did some very basic surveying on some arable sites where we looked at spring barley. So we did 5 soil pits looking at spring barley soil and a neighbouring habitat. So 1 was a hedgerow, 3 were grasslands of various types. And I did a little bit of statistical analysis to see with those paired samples, so for each site, the spring barley, so the arable habitat versus the neighbouring habitat. And I found that earthworm abundance, there was no statistically significant difference between the arable and the neighbouring sites. But when I looked at earthworm species diversity, I found that arable habitats had significantly lower earthworm species diversity than their neighbouring habitats. And we can see, looking at these box diagrams, it's quite clear that there is a difference. So it kind of backs up what I was saying earlier. I think we need to be thinking much more about looking at earthworm species diversity than we do earthworm counts when we're talking about the impact that things like agriculture or other interventions are having on our earthworm populations. And then I just want to briefly mention the Earthworm Image Recognition Project. So I did a webinar on this last week. All of that material is available on YouTube to view, and I'm going to be publishing a report on this and a blog imminently that I'll share with everybody. But the key takeaways were there were some problems with the algorithm identifying earthworms. These are things that we might be able to fix. So, for example, the algorithm wasn't necessarily always using the earthworm to make the species determination within the image. And we were finding that species weren't always being correctly classified, and that there were some common mistakes, like it was hedging its bets when it came to common things, for example. So there's a lot more on that in the talks that both myself and Tom August gave, and I'll be writing that up in a blog. But some key takeaways where we got a lot of records out of it, 11 Vice County firsts across all the Vice Counties that you can see there from the Earthworm sampling days that we did. We got new specimens for the national collection at the Natural History Museum and for a regional collection at the World Museum in Liverpool. It gave me an opportunity to collect some nice live specimen images that will go into future keys and we're using training courses. And we got a whole load of new earthworm enthusiasts out of it. So I also just want to mention that I've got an Earthworm ID course coming up at the Natural History Museum next week. Still some spaces on that if people want to book and learn about Earthworm ID. We've got the Earthworm sampling days as part of our annual field meeting up in Lancashire. A load of virtual events coming up next year that people are welcome to book on, and I'll drop the links in the chat. And that brings me to the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Keiron.